Well, now is the perfect time to do what is probably one of my very favorite garden chores, and that is pruning. And today I'm going to talk about 4 different kinds of pruning and what you will need to do so. But my question of the day is, what is your favorite type of pruning to do in the garden? And here are the 4 types. Is it thinning? Is it shearing? Is it tip pruning or shortening? Or is it debudding, pinching, or that also could be tip pruning? So which of those 4 is your favorite type of pruning to do, and what are you pruning right now? To be able to do all of these different things, then you want to have certain tools. So for shearing, I've got some long-handled pruners. These are Coronas. I also want to make sure I've got some good garden gloves so that I don't cut my finger as I did the other day. Do as I say, not as I do. To pinch or disbud, deadhead, or kind of shorten, you might want to have just some good sharp scissors. And for tip pruning or shortening, you probably, and also for thinning, then you want to have a good pair of hand pruners. These are Centurion. But obviously use any really good sharp tools that you have, and then a basket just to catch your debris. So now let's get on with the number 1 type of pruning, and that would be thinning. Well, the first technique, pruning technique I'm going to talk about is thinning, and it is probably one of my very favorite techniques and instant gratification chores to do in the garden because I get immediate results, and it also serves a very important design aesthetic that is one of the most valuable, I think, and that is creating negative space and also transparency so you can see through what plants you are thinning into other areas of the garden. And I love that. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know how I love to prune. And this one is an All That Glitters Viburnum. I believe it's a proven winner's plant. Now, as always, a lot of my plants grow together, and one type of shrub will kind of wind its way through another type of shrub. And right here, I've got some of these gorgeous snowflake oak leaf hydrangeas that have insinuated their way into this All That Glitters Viburnum. So I'm going to kind of try to separate that. Now, as a rule, I'm going to look at the interior. So Stuart, let's get a real before picture. And this is getting ready to bloom. So I think by pruning this up and thinning it out, I'm going to make it a more impressive specimen. But the other thing is that it's going to make it look a little bit more mature and a little bit less shrub-like and more tree-like, which is what I did to that beautiful snowball viburnum over there. Now, first of all, you can go in, if you're a little bit intimidated by this process, you can go in and you can just start by pruning out the dead wood, which is always a good place to start and a good rule of thumb, no matter what kind of pruning you're doing. But I see right now that I've got some cross branching going on here, and I'm going to take this one off, kind of starting at the bottom and working my way up. And if I so chose, because this one doesn't have a little bud on it, but this would be great to bring inside and put in a vase and use it as part of your interior decor. So I'm also going to remove, Stuart, if you look in here, yeah, some of this interior foliage or foliage, some of this interior foliage, because I want to expose the branches. So that doesn't even need to be pruned off. Here's another branch. Let me get it out of my way. You can just remove it with your gloves. And by the way, your gloved hands. And by the way, let me tell you, please do wear gloves doing this. Don't do as I say, not as I do, because the other day I was pruning. I was too anxious to get the job done. I didn't have my gloves on, and I slit my thumb by doing this and by not being as attentive as I should have been. I was daydreaming and not being in the moment. Okay, so immediately you can see how this has kind of cleaned out this area in here. and exposed the branching. Now at first, it might look like I have made these branches a little too bare, but I promise you there is so much more growth to come in this season, and it will quite quickly look overly lush and overly dense before you know it. And the other thing that this does is it provides greater air circulation so that the wind and the breeze can kind of get through it. It will make the garden overall a little bit less stuffy. So I'm going to cut out some more of these interior branches. This one would also be a good candidate for bringing inside. But I'm working kind of, can you tell, Stuart, that I'm working down to up?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'm kind of working from the bottom.
You can see it laying up.
And if you're concerned about doing this kind of thinning, then by all means start out conservatively, then stand back and do some more.
What's the risk if they, I mean, like how much do you have to cut off before it starts to be a problem?
Well, I would not cut off more than a third, but remember it's like, here's one with a bud, Stuart, that would be beautiful in a vase. I wouldn't cut off more than a third, but I'm definitely not going to be doing that. This is also in its heavy growth phase, so if I am a little bit overly aggressive in my cutting, then it will grow back rather quickly. There's some more dead wood that I just cut out. So in general, I am working from bottom to top and from inside out to thin these branches. So I'm going to get down in here, Stuart. You may not be able to see me for a while. It also helps excavate then. While I'm down here, I can see what's now growing underneath that might be problematic. Like I've got some Virginia creeper down in here. I can get this out of the way, because by thinning this out, it exposes other things. Here is kind of a straight sucker that's just growing. And, pardon me?
I said I like this camera.
Yeah, in a less, Stuart just got a new camera. In a less elegant way, so I'm going to take that out. Here's another one. A lot of these that grow very straight are suckers. And I try to get as close to the bottom as I can in pruning them out, because what I want is the arching of the branches, not so much those straight suckers like this one.
Yeah, I see a couple more down there.
Yeah. That are coming up.
I did this in my backyard, and it was one of the most enjoyable experiences.
It was?
Yeah, it's very therapeutic. Like,
yeah, it's very cathartic.
Yeah.
Stuart, are you mic'd up today?
No, but I'm close enough to the
okay,
phone that I think
okay.
I can make this work.
Okay, I think I'm going to take, as always, you're talking a lot today. It's because you feel better. You were sick yesterday. Okay, I'm going to get back in here and take this off. The other thing is by thinning this out and creating negative space, I also can tackle some of this Dutsia while I'm here. Always be opportunistic. Just because I'm pruning this Viburnum doesn't mean that I can't prune other things in and around it. And periodically, by the way, you guys, it is very helpful. There's another sucker. It's very helpful to stand up and stretch your back.
Oh, it's really starting to open up.
Is it starting to open up now? Oh yeah, you can definitely see how the canopy is starting to open up through the center. Here is another sucker. There you go. Okay. What?
Oh, sorry, nothing.
Okay. Sometimes I also, here's another technique. See this density in here? I'm going to thin this out and reduce the density by pruning out some of these branches that are coming out laterally, starting at the bottom. And then I can thin this out more if I like by taking out more of those branches. And in this case, I'm going to take out this one. Can you see how much more light is getting through there, Stuart, and how I am opening up and revealing the beauty of the shrub itself? And it's looking more like a small, beautifully pruned tree instead of an overgrown shrub. And this is how you can give instant maturity to plants in your garden. You can give them instant importance. And the other thing I like about it, because there is so much in the garden over which I have no control. I have no control over what my neighbors do. I have no control over the weather. I have no control over, well, a number of different things. But what I love about pruning is that it gives me control and perhaps most importantly, immediate gratification. Immediate results. That's
it right there, huh?
Yeah, it's just, I just find it so cathartic. Well, I think you can kind of see, Stuart, did we give them a good enough idea?
I think so, yeah.
Of what we were doing, so we can move on to our next pruning technique. But before we do that, I'm going to take some of these inside and put them in a vase. Let's move on. Oh, and by the way, I am just using my Fisker's pruners, or excuse me, these are Centurion pruners. I love these. We'll put a link, but I also love Bridgetown, and there's a number of different kinds of really good pruners. These are the ones that were just closest at hand. So I'll come back and do a little bit more fastidious pruning on this later, but I think you have an idea of the rationale for why I do it and how I do it. Now, Stuart, let's move on to our next pruning project. Well, the second form of pruning, if number one was thinning, number two is just the opposite of that. It's shearing, because what we're doing is pruning for density and thickness, because pruning induces growth. And so I find that I shear for two different reasons. One, in this case, I call it extreme pruning, like an extreme sport, where I am really being aggressive about it, not really caring about exactly where along the stem I'm pruning, but I'm doing this just to reduce its size. So just a little while ago, this was that beautiful Deutzia that was blooming all in white. But it had gotten, what, this tall, Stuart, perhaps? And so next year, remember, it's going to keep growing throughout the growing season. So by next year, it would be even taller. And I like to keep it a little bit more in bounds. So I've already done one layer of pretty aggressive pruning on this. And by the way, this is what I was doing when I cut my finger. I didn't have gloves on, so I have gloves on now. But you can already see how I have reduced it. Now, in this case, it's a little bit difficult because I've got some shrubs that are growing through it. In this case, again, it's this oak leaf hydrangea. And I don't want to cut off any of these beautiful blooms. So sometimes I have to pre-position the Deutzia branches to get them to a place where I can prune them without also shearing back the oak leaf hydrangea. And so I am using my Corona pruners, not my Barnells that I save for pruning my boxwood, which is another form of shearing. But for this aggressive shearing on really woody plants, I find these stubbier ones a little bit better. And typically, after I prune, I take all of my tools inside at the end of the day and I clean them with that tool cleaner. Stuart, let's put a link. And if you, by the way, if you don't have a link, you can just go to my Amazon shop or other types, like on my website, Stuart, you can go there and you can find some of these products that I recommend. And by the way, I don't care if you get them from the links I provide or you get them from your local purveyor, your local hardware store, even better. Okay, so this is a form of really hard shearing. Now, it looks pretty assaulted and brutalized right now, but I promise you, in no time at all, since it's gotten hot, that a lot of this will grow out almost immediately. And by doing this, I am not only reducing size, but I am also, again, creating a little bit more airflow. And I am increasing the amount of light that other plants in the area will benefit from. In this case, these white wedding hydrangeas. And even though it looks rather brutalized and tormented, it nevertheless still looks kind of tidy and neat, and I try to keep my shearing in as kind of a uniform manner as possible. Some of these outliers that are a little bit too close to the oak leaf hydrangeas, I can come back in with my handheld pruners and tidy this up a little bit more later. So this is the first type of shearing, what I call extreme shearing for size management and control. So let's move on to part B of shearing, and that's how I form typically topiaries and trim my boxwood. Well, I've showed you many times how I have sheared my boxwood for shape and also for a certain kind of size. But in this case, I'm just doing the same thing on this myrtle topiary, and all I'm using is just some inexpensive scissors. Stuart and I are trying to be better about demonstrating this because so often it's hard to see things in my garden because the backdrop is so green and lush, and it's hard for you to see the distinction. So hopefully Stuart can, with my white shirt, we can kind of see the difference. So what this does is it's going to do two things. It's going to reestablish this triple tier form, and it's also going to diminish its size and force new growth so that the new growth and the form has a lot more density. So this, you just have to not be afraid and just do this kind of shearing with confidence, because anything that you do will grow out. So these are just some of my dollar scissors, and I can go and I'm just kind of pruning along the form that's already been established, which is this circular form. And
is it something you have to worry about doing because it'll all grow?
I don't worry about pruning or shearing in between leaf nodes because I really just don't care in this case. I'm not going to be damaging really. In other words, the cuts are not going to brown, and you won't even be able to really tell where I have cut other than the fact that it's just reestablishing its form. It also, this kind of shearing, will help differentiate the form. In other words, differentiate the top ball from the second one, just as I did over here when I sheared these boxwood the other day. Stuart, did you help me with that? Did we do a video on that?
Well, it's hard to remember sometimes.
Yeah, because once they get overgrown, you lose the form and you lose the shape. And so all I'm doing is just re-establishing the shape. Now, I could prune this really tightly if I wanted, but I wanted to put on not only a denser form, but a larger form. So I'm not cutting as far back as I could in this shearing example. If I wanted to reduce its size, like I sometimes do with my boxwood, then I of course would shear it back more towards the interior.
Cleans up quick, doesn't
Yeah, it does. This cleans up. And this, by the way, you guys, is so meditative. It's one of my favorite things to do. The more you prune.
When are we going to do a bonsai video with?
Yes, we still need to do with Phil.
Man, that'll be cool.
It's hard to accommodate all of our schedules.
That happens.
And should someone corrected us, Stuart, we need to say bonsai. Bonsai. Okay.
As opposed to bone.
Yes,
bone instead
yes,
of bone?
yes.
Okay.
Some of these things are colloquial according to your region, but for me what it's about, I guess, is primarily communication, if they know what we're talking about. Okay, now there might be, once I get it in place, back on the stand, and I probably should have put something underneath this to catch the clippings, but I really wanted you to see what I'm doing. And this is another example of my second form of pruning, and that is shearing. Now, let's move on to the third type of pruning. We'll do that in the front yard. Let's head that way. Let's talk a little bit about timing. Most of these things can now be pruned because they're in an active growth stage. So for example, your fruit trees, if you're growing fruit, probably have, well, I take that back, I shouldn't make an assumption, but depending on your zone, they have probably already flowered or are about to flower, and you want to prune and thin your fruit trees after they have flowered because you want to reduce some of the interior branching to get more light and air into those areas that are producing fruit so that the fruit can mature and it will give you much better, more mature, delicious production of that fruit. So thinning can be done this time of year. Definitely shearing can be done this time of year if you prune after bloom. So if you want to reduce the size of your azaleas, of your forsythia, of your quince, you're going to do that after bloom, which in my 7B garden is right now. This third form of pruning can also be done right now. This is a Nellie Stevens holly that started out probably just about 3 to 4 feet tall, and it's obviously matured over time. It's gotten not only a lot taller, but it's gotten a lot wider. And so in this case, I need to do some branch shortening, or I also think about it as tipping. I'm going to reduce the lateral growth by shortening these branches. So it's already fairly narrow at the top, but I don't want it to grow any more wide so that it then impedes passage to my front door or to just being on the porch. So in this case, I am going to reduce the length of these different branches. Now, in this space, I don't really need to stand on a ladder, so I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to take the top as kind of a guide, and then I'm just going to reduce in kind of a pyramidal fashion the length of these branches. Now in this case, I'm paying a little bit of attention to where I'm cutting because I don't want to cut right through a leaf. So in this case, I'm going to cut in between the leaf and the next layer of leaves.
So you are being more careful.
I am being a little bit more careful. Now in some cases, I might be more brutal. But this isn't so large and isn't so mature that I can't easily do this just with my hand, and I don't have my gloves on in this instance because I want you to really be able to see what I'm doing, which is really being more attentive to the placement of my cuts. So you can see down here, this branch could really get in the way of things. So I am just tip pruning. And by the way, this is probably a technique I would imagine that they use at Christmas tree farms to get this conical shape. And I did this last year, and I kind of do it over time. Again, if this was a much larger, denser specimen, I might do some shearing on it. But in this case, this tip pruning will be just fine. And also another reason to do it at this time of year is, especially if you are pruning prickly hollies, Let's move over here a little bit, Stuart. This is just a common Burford or Chinese holly, and I'm going to be doing this to this variety as well. But one of the reasons to do it this time of year is because all of this new growth is soft and fleshy, and it's still not prickly. If I waited to do it until the foliage had matured and aged, this would be dark green and it would be very difficult to work with because it would. Excuse Stuart's indelicacy. But yes, it would. It would do just that. It would do just that, okay? So by doing this now on both of these types of hollies, then I am making the job more pleasant. It's also not as hot. And it's not as likely to scratch my arms, which as you can see, I have done. If you ever question whether or not I do my own gardening, just look at my arms and my hands to see if they're scratched up. Now, if you have an example of, say, this holly, and you want to turn it into more of a tree form or a topiary form because you want to be able to underplant, then you would start at the bottom, just expose the trunk, and then at whatever point you want the canopy to begin, just lose all of the branching below that. That way you can turn a holly into more of a tree form.
That's one of the coolest things, making things into little and big trees.
Yeah, into little and big trees, because I think it just is so it's very satisfying, and it's also a creative process. So I am tip pruning or shortening these lateral branches. Obviously, I need to get on the other side of the porch to be able to get to the other side. It also helps to do this in the cool of the morning, doesn't it, Stuart?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. It also helps to shoot in the cool of the morning,
yes.
Preferably when mosquitoes aren't active. Okay, so this is, oh yes, this is, and by the way, you guys, you were so sweet to inquire about Stuart and his health.
Feeling better.
Stuart is such a fragile flower, but he's feeling much better today.
Thank you, everybody, for your well wishes.
Yes, he appreciates it. Okay. So, I think it's maybe not as dramatic a transformation as the ones in the back, but nevertheless, I think you can see the rationale and the technique for shortening or tip pruning as your third form of shearing. Okay, now let's go on to our fourth and final form of pruning. Now to wrap up, let's talk about my fourth form of pruning, which I guess it is considered pruning, and that is called pinching. And what we're trying to do is induce thickness and bushiness in whatever it is that's growing, whether it's an annual, a perennial, a flowering perennial, or in this case, I'm doing it on one of my olive trees. Now this has already achieved the height that I want it to achieve. And at this point now, I really want it to just get bushier and thicker and look a little less straggly. So what I'm going to do is start pinching out the tips, which will not only induce new leaf growth from the top, but it will also in the interior force new leaf growth. So you can see here, this is an example. Yeah, okay, this is an example where I have pruned out or pinched off this tip here, and notice how it's exponential growth. By clipping off this one, it produced two. Now, if you can really see here, in this next set, you can also see that if I pinched off this, there are two tiny little nascent buds at the bottom of that. Can you see them?
Yeah, really
I don't know. They look like little dots. And let me see if we can find a better example. But those will then turn into 4. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 can become 16 because it's exponential growth if we just keep pinching.
That's
so
specific to this plant?
No, this would be true of pretty much most plants if you just kept pinching. Now at a certain point you don't want to keep pinching because you want the flower to ultimately bloom and produce. But in this case I'm looking at leaf growth. So here is another example. Here is where I did the initial pinch right here. Can you see that? Yes. It produced these 2 stems.
Yeah, this is a while, this is further back.
Yes, this is a while ago. I pinched, production, pinch, production. So every 1 cut produces 2. Finally, my last pinch was right there. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. And that produced 2. And I'm just going to keep doing this. This is also kind of a form of tip pruning because it was the same as the holly tree, because it will make this entire plant bushier, thicker, and more desirous of the form that I want. It also is simultaneously shortening some of these branches. Now, this is how it works on a small tree like this olive tree, but the same principle holds true for a perennial. So earlier in the year, I've already done this once. I'm not going to do it now because as you can see over here, this Veronica, this lavender Veronica is getting ready to produce flowers. This is the similar type of rationale for deadheading because when you deadhead, it produces and forces new bloom. So let's get an example here of where 1 becomes 2. So let's see. Here's a good example right here. I'm going to sacrifice a bloom for you guys. Oh, man. Okay, let me pinch off that leaf so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So this is getting ready to bloom. Earlier in the season, before it was getting ready to bloom, I did that. And actually, if I wanted to postpone bloom on this entire perennial area, I could just by shearing it all back, and it would come back that much more thickly and put out that many more flowers. But I wanted to flower now, so I'm not going to do that. It's also sometimes called the Chelsea chop. But right here, if I sacrifice this bloom right here and I tip it or pinch it out, see here, Stuart? Yep. Look, there's the 2 new stems that will then come up and both of them will bloom. So that is how pinching is also a form of both tip pruning and will induce more flowering. So that's kind of my 4th and final way that you can prune for bloom, for shape, for reduction in size, and basically to just help you realize the design that you want for the totality of your garden, but also for those individual specimens. And so let's end on probably our finest and most popular example of judicious pruning, and that is by just showing the architecture and the trunk work of this gorgeous Chinese snowball viburnum. You guys have a wonderful Saturday. Well, here you go. Here is your outfit of the day. In case you hadn't noticed, I'm kind of having a linen moment, and very much a wrinkled linen moment, because I really don't care about it being very, very well pressed. It's about being comfortable and cool. So starting from top to bottom, I can't speak highly enough about these reading blue light glasses I got. They come in 3 different color palettes, tortoise, black, and clear. I got these online. Some of you have told me that you've gotten them as well and how much you love them. And let me tell you, these are great. One of the best purchases I've made in a while, and I'm keeping them on top of my head because I'm getting ready to do some things and I want to make sure I know where they are. My top I got online. It's actually very long. It would be great to sleep in. Some of you may be saying, oh, does she really work in white when she's outside? And if you have followed my channel for any length of time, you know that yes, I do, because none of my clothes are that precious. Most of them are thrifted, though this I bought online. I also got the belt online, and Stuart, let's put links to all of these. And by the way, if you find it hard to find them in the description, Stuart did a little video about that, but you can also follow me on Instagram and go to my Instagram stories, because everything that I share on here, Carrie also shares in my stories on Instagram. My breeches are from last year. I love them because they are loose, they're cool, they have pockets, and I got these at Target. Now this last thing, I don't know why ugly shoes are the most comfortable, but they are. And I am seldom motivated by anything on social media, like on Instagram or something, or things that just pop up in my feed to buy. But these, as ugly as they are, absolutely live up to what they claim. They're called, I think they're called cloud slides, and they come in all sorts of different fun colors. I got these, and actually they're a little bit too large. I probably would have sized down. They're about $24 or something. But let me tell you guys, these are so comfortable. They really are like walking on clouds.
They come in black?
They come in black. They come in all sorts of different colors. In fact, I'm going to get some. I'll get you some. What size do you wear?
11 and a half.
Okay, I'm going to get some for you and for Hubs, because they are just great. And I'm going to have an inside pair and an outside pair.
They look cool.
They are so comfortable. They really are like walking on clouds. So if you have like plantar fasciitis or something like that, my son does, then these are great. You can see the thick soles is one of the reasons that make them, I think, feel like you are walking on something very cushiony. You know those kind of mats that are thick, Stuart, that you at hair salons and kitchen, and for people who do lots of standing, it must be the same technology, because that's what it feels like. Yep, so they are great, and I love them, and tomorrow is my day. I'm gonna go get a pedicure. So there you go. Oh, my earrings. My earrings are, thank you.
I didn't let you ask me if you
Stuart was
forgot
kind of
anything
going
yet.
like this. I'm thinking he's telling me to wrap it up already. No, these are just some kind of ethnic vibe. I love them, and I got these at some kind of bead shop while we were traveling. But they're not very heavy. By the way, I don't like to wear heavy earrings, so these aren't very heavy, and they're kind of fun. Stuart, have I forgotten anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well there you go. There's your outfit du jour.